Currently, a considerable amount of media attention has been drawn to the atrocities committed at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where the U.S. government has been holding persons believed to be terrorists or suspected to have ties to terrorist organizations. They have been held without formal charges, with no hope for a trial, and many of these suspects are subjected to torture in order to extract usable information from them. One of the torture techniques that was employed is called waterboarding. And since I was sure this wasn't a fun water sport, I decided to investigate and find out exactly what it was. The technique is described on several websites, and after reading them and watching, of course, as always you can find on the internet, a corresponding video, I was appalled at what was involved. According to Wikipedia, waterboarding is a form of torture, more specifically a type of water torture, in which water is poured over a cloth covering the face and breathing passages of an immobilized captive. It causes the individual to experience a sensation of drowning. Waterboarding causes extreme pain, dry drowning, damage to the lungs, and brain injury from oxygen deprivation, along with other physical injuries including broken bones due to those enduring it struggling against restraints. Waterboarding results in lasting psychological damage and even death. And the adverse physical consequences of waterboarding can manifest themselves for months after the event, while the psychological effects of waterboarding can last for years. Due to its prominence in the media, waterboarding seems to many, including me, to be a new phenomenon, and many people have never heard of it. However, the technique utilized is far from new, and I was shocked to discover that this particular type of torture has been used for centuries, most notably during the Spanish Inquisition and the Flemish Inquisition. Now, of course, I and most of you have heard of the Spanish Inquisition. But for those of you, including myself, that have not heard of the Flemish Inquisition, you are in for a surprise. The Flemish Inquisition's purpose was to rid the Netherlands and Belgium of Anabaptist Mennonites. According to the Mennonite Online Encyclopedia, torture, including the use of a waterboarding type of technique, made it possible to obtain names and other facts concerning the leaders of the Anabaptist movement. Here is a recounting of one Mennonite's experience. And as they still did not obtain anything from me, to the implication of my neighbor, Master Hans took water, and holding my nose shut with one hand, began to pour water on my abdomen and thence all over my breast and into my mouth, even as one should drink when he was very thirsty. During the entire time, a cloth had been laid on my face, and I think that the can from which he poured it out, the water inside was about 3 pints. And when I was at the end of my breath and wanted to fetch such, I drew the water all into my body, and whereupon I suffered such distress that it would be impossible for me to relate or to describe it. But the Lord be forever praised, he kept my lips from speaking. And when they still could not obtain anything from me, they caused the cord which was on my thigh to be loosened, and then they applied it to a fresh place, and wound it much tighter than before, so that I thought it would kill me. And I began to shake and tremble greatly. He, Master Hans, then began to proceed to pour water into me again, so that I think he emptied 4 such cans, and my body became so full of it that twice it came out again at the throat. And thus I became so weak that I fainted, for when I recovered from my swoon, I found myself alone with Master Hans and Daniel de Keyser. And Master Hans was so busily engaged in loosing my cords that it seemed that maybe that they were now concerned over me. However, the Lord in a large degree took away my pain every time. Whenever it became so severe that I thought impossible to bear it, my members became as dead. Eternal praise, thanks, honor, and glory be to the Lord. For when it was over, I thought that, by the help of the Lord, I had fought the good fight. This practice was deliberately followed during the Flemish Inquisition to gain information in order to be able to arrest the leaders, so that the rest, like sheep without shepherds, would be conveniently scattered. But in this respect, the authorities were mistaken, for although most of the elders and preachers during the Flemish Inquisition were executed, the Anabaptist movement continued and even gained in momentum. These events unfortunately illustrated that then, as it is now, peaceful coexistence with those of different beliefs is under attack, and hating those who are different than yourself is encouraged if they are considered the enemy. The children in our nation's schools are being taught to hate and despise persons whose customs and nationalities are foreign to them, while racial, ethnic, and religious genocide is being condoned by governments all around the world. Concurrently, many immigrants are now being turned away from our land of plenty out of fear that they will create disharmony. And even within our own citizens, people of different races and creeds are being demarginalized and discriminated against, and in some cases, even murdered. So I ask you, where is the justice? Where is the love? And where is the peace? This Advent season, the answer begins with all of us. When we let the spirit of the baby boy born in Bethlehem into our hearts, we are no longer part of the problem, but instead are part of the solution. Jesus plants the seeds of peace, tolerance, and love into our hearts and asks us to cultivate them. And if we let them grow to fruition, they will become a light for others to follow. We need to stop sitting around and complaining about what is wrong with the world and instead ask God for the courage to change it. However, in order to bring about the desired change, we first have to realize something very important. Even though Jesus is the source of all change, we can no longer just sit back and wait for him to act alone. This Christmas, we must realize that we are active partners for change with him and for him, and we must wholeheartedly seek to make a difference in our world. We must also practice what we preach and avoid hypocrisy by criticizing less and doing more, because nothing is going to get better until we do our own part. Unfortunately, it's easy to talk about what needs to change, but it is much harder to actually facilitate it. But that is exactly what God calls us to do. Let us return to our passage in Micah. Come, and let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. Only Jesus can and will guide us to peace. If we open our hearts and are willing to learn from him, we will understand his great plan for peace for this world. For his ways are not our ways, and only he knows the decisions we should make and the actions we should take. For if every heart allowed him to teach his path of peaceful coexistence, there would be no war, no hatred, no prejudice, no discrimination, and no fear. Only justice, mercy, and love would remain. And again, let's return to the words of Micah. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. According to Micah, there can and will be a world where there is war no more. Therefore, I call upon you to pray. Pray for the world's leaders during this Advent time. Pray that they will humble themselves before the Christ child of Bethlehem, that they may worship him. For if they seek and follow his ways, there will be no more need for war, for soldiers, and certainly there will be no Guantanamo Bay. Let us all pause for a moment, observe silence, and let us all collectively pray for our world's leaders and meditate on a world filled with peace. For every man, according to Micah, will sit under his own vine and under his own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid, for the Lord Almighty has spoken. All the nations may walk in the name of their gods, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever.